Assalamu alaikum, good evening, good morning. Tahira Azam from The Toilet Show is here with my esteemed guest, Andy Swindler from Chicago. Thank you, Andy, for joining us and giving your precious time to join the show.
Of course, thank you for having me.
As I have shared in introduction of my guest that Andy brings hearts together to unify humanity. He envisions a world that embraces healthy tensions to ensure dignity and agency for every person. Andy is devoted to building an equitable world by understanding and dismantling his own complexity in systems of operation while working on transforming the system themselves. He co founded Feel Real to hold space for people to share our true stories and connect deeply in community to shift the dominant narrative from fear to love. So, our today's topic, as my viewers know, that the toilet show focus on Sustainable Development Goals 6 Target 2, provision of clean and safe toilet for all. Today, we will request Andy to please help us and guide us that how we can develop awareness campaigns for provision of clean and healthy toilets, safe toilets in Pakistan, especially. And let me share that in Pakistan, unfortunately, we still have the problem of open defecation, and around 20 million of our people still don't have access to a clean and safe toilet. So, Andy, kindly please come start with our very important challenge and kindly guide us that how we can develop some campaign.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and I'm just honored to be part of your cause in this way, whatever I can do. And it's funny, even in the bio you just read about me, dignity and agency are those two key terms that really guide me. And I think if we can have a world where everybody enjoys those two qualities, then it will help us, I think, get away from a tendency to want to come in and sort of solve a problem from the top down, right, or from the outside in. I think really we need to raise people up and empower them from the inside out. And really, what you're working on seems to really strike at both of those, right? Dignity. It's hard to actually think of something more important for dignity than, I think, sanitation and the ability to just honor the human processes, and obviously that relates to health, which then speaks to agency, right? We were talking earlier, and obviously that relates to health and the ability to be in the world and behave socially, and has economic impacts and everything else. So it just seems like such a critically important issue. And I do want to frame this. I mean, I'm sitting here in Chicago in the United States, where I've always had access to the infrastructure that you're talking about building. And so it's just very important for me that's a lot of what drives me is really recognizing my own privileges and what I have as an American, especially a white male American, and not necessarily feel bad about those, but build a world where everybody has access to those levels of dignity and agency. So there's two components to this. I know we were talking about earlier. There's the hardware, as you said, actually building the infrastructure and the toilets and the latrines, and then there's behavioral change. And when it comes to the infrastructure, that I think is going to boil down to how many resources exist within Pakistan. Can this be done at a community level and a grassroots level? Are there programs in place to have volunteers or get corporate sponsorship? And I'm not sure. I don't actually know too much about Pakistan. And that's an area where if Pakistan is limited in that way, outside resources, I think, would be extremely helpful in terms of economic development and money. Um, and I do believe there are programs here in America and elsewhere that could be tapped into. And I think it's interesting. One thing you said earlier, which is sad in a way, is that people don't take this seriously, and I'm curious if that's. I mean, literally, there's a term, toilet humor, right? I mean, that's a thing, right? In a lot of comedic circles. I'm really curious if that's, on the one hand, that's sad that obviously people they're really not taking human dignity seriously. That's sad and that's not good. On the other hand, I actually wonder if it might be an opportunity for you. One show that comes to mind is the Daily Show with Trevor Noah, and I could totally imagine you being on that show because, and even if there's a way to use humor and there's a very delicate path perhaps to watch to use humor around this to get people's attention, because it could get people's attention, and then in the way they do on that show with satire, use satire and humor to kind of get people's attention and then bring them into the real issue and then bring them in, so that's one idea that comes up. I know getting on the Daily Show is not trivial, but I really could imagine that happening for you. There are a lot of new kinds of social networks emerging right now. There's one in particular. There's an app called Clubhouse, and I think this is part of what Feel Real is about: is bringing people together in dialogues. And so we're bringing people together in intimate dialogues because we believe that's really where we can go deep together. And only when we go deep together and really see each other's humanity can we see the truth and face the truth. And it's hard to have empathy in the abstract. So when you tell me 20 million Pakistanis don't have access to this kind of sanitation, I register that as, wow, that's a big problem, but I don't really feel it because 20 million people, that's not how empathy works. Empathy is much more personal. So I think there's something there too about telling the stories. And I love this show, and I love your life's work and your mission. It's beautiful. And I'm curious if there are ways to really tell the stories of the people who are living in these conditions and interview them. And maybe you've already done that. I haven't looked at the rest of your shows, but that would certainly be one way that I think would help to really break down the abstract nature of the problem. For those of us who aren't there, I'm sure if you're living there, it's not abstract at all. But for those of us who are not, it falls in a category of, okay, there's all these big problems in the world. And that's not to diminish them whatsoever or dismiss them. It's to say, how do we get people to care? I mean, a lot of my work is around systemic racism in America. And that's a problem that a lot of people aren't willing to face. And we aren't willing to look at the truth of what happened here in America with enslaving Africans and everything that's happened since then. And at the root of it, they're different problems, but the root of it to me is quite similar. The root of it is, how do we face our truth, and how do we have the will and the motivation to work on problems that might seem impossible, but they're not. I mean, America's a pretty young country. All of our infrastructure is only a couple hundred years old, right, in terms of sanitation. If that, maybe not even that old. So it's certainly possible. So I think that's starting to get into. So there's all of that to me is around. Oh, how do we actually get funding and resources and visibility and all of the things that might bring the infrastructure. And I'll pause there, but then there's this whole second category of the behavioral change. But do you want me to keep going, or do you want to interject something?
Yeah, I have a little question. That as you work with the people and Feel Real, as you have shared, that to connect with people deep down. So this is a problem over here, and it's not only with the people who don't have access. It's also a problem that regarding our public toilets maintenance or management or their cleanliness as well, because the travelers, they also face this challenge. But on the other hand, we want our country, because Pakistan is a beautiful country. We have really wonderful geography and very diverse culture. It has a lot of potential to attract tourists from all over the world. So I want to ask that what are the key ingredients, or how really people change their behavior, how we can, touch their hearts to really empathize with our issue, and then start something, only maybe just talking about this more sensitivity. So this I want to ask, that how, where we should start.
Well, I put it in two categories, personally. One is the idea of telling stories, broadcasting, kind of like we're doing now, right? So if you have access to people in Pakistan that are really living in these conditions that could tell a story, I think that goes a long way, and that can really touch a heart and really start to open up and make it much more personal. So now I'm seeing a human being and a person, and I'm not just seeing an abstract number. I think that's really important. Um, the second category is really what Feel Real is about, is actually gathering people in dialogue, um, and especially small group dialogue. And that is the next level, because that's not just even me basically seeing somebody on TV or on the internet, but that's, I can really sit with them. And we do. We were talking about this earlier. We really live in an amazing age where you and I, pretty much exactly halfway around the world, can just sit here casually, having a video chat. It's my morning, it's your evening, and that's extraordinary. And so, gathering people in small groups, especially from very diverse areas. In America, the diversity might be a racial diversity or an economic diversity or something like that. But if we could expand that diversity to, say, a global diversity, and say, let's build a series of small group discussions where people come together and learn about this, and it's you, and it's some of the other people in Pakistan who are impacted, and it's any number of other people. And it's tricky because I think the attraction to a broadcast medium is obviously that we can broadcast out and reach a lot more people at once. But I don't think we tend to go as deep because we're not actually interacting. Most of the people in the audience here aren't interacting with us, or maybe they have the ability to chat a little bit. But that's not the same level, and let's say that's more easily forgettable. I think the world is always moving faster and faster, and a lot of this work is really slowing down enough to see each other and be with each other.
So Andy, there are all, sometimes it happens that people tend to go into denial. For example, that if we talk about this issue, sometimes I receive these comments that this is not our issue. This is not an issue in Pakistan. You are creating bad face for Pakistan by highlighting this issue at this social media, because it goes around the world, and like we are talking almost around the world. So how to face, or how to handle this denial?
Whew. That's something I'm quite familiar with. uh, as I mentioned, one of my passions here is systemic racism, and that's exactly the issue we face with mostly white people. But I'm not even going to say it's limited to white people. There's plenty of people who are denying what I think is truth. And here, part of the problem is there's an entire machine that is, from everything from our education and the way we're taught our history, because of course we want to sort of paint a better picture of America in our history books and for our children, and that's typically what we do, than the truth of, coming here and stealing land and building all this infrastructure with stolen bodies, and that denial. There's denial. There's denial, I suppose, that's based on ignorance. That's really like, wow, I don't. Like, that can't be true because I've never heard it or I've never seen it, and that's a kind of denial that's probably easier to address because then we can just gradually educate people. And then there's an active state of denial where no, I've been exposed to the truth, but I really 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 don't want to face it because it's really hard, and maybe it feels really really horrible, and that can turn into a really active state of denial where I'm going to actively push against this or deny that this is even happening. So like I said, I think the first state of denial is in some ways easier to address because we can look at that through education. The second one, we kind of have to pick where we're putting our energy, and I don't know if it always makes sense to put energy in the second category, because there's a component of this which is really socialization, and there's all kinds of different estimates about what's the tipping point, but typically it's somewhere between sort of like 10 and 17% of a civilization, of a population, needs to be behaving a certain way before that starts to catch hold, before that starts to influence the rest of the civilization. So I think there's a component of that here, and so the more you are able to get people talking about this, taking it seriously, I think eventually that will lead to a tipping point where people will care more about it. I'm curious, and of course I'm sure it varies, but do you think that's mostly people who have never seen this issue, or that they are living in the developed parts of Pakistan and they're in denial that exists, and they don't want you out there giving bad PR to Pakistan, basically?
Yeah, most of the people, it sounds to me that they are from the privileged class, I would say, because they don't have really any exposure to this problem. They remain into the very developed cities, or they most of the time spend their life from out of Pakistan in developed countries, because otherwise I don't think so that this kind of statement should come, at least, because yes, we Pakistan is an Islamic country, and we have, mashallah, mosques are everywhere in Pakistan, and with every religious place, it's really common. We have washrooms, and also there are gas stations, petrol pumps, and by default in their design they have to have female and male washroom at their space. But the problem is maintenance and cleanliness of those available public toilets, and because they are not giving any financial benefit to those places, so they are in very, I would say, whenever I have experience, it's really bad. And in a household, because most of the rural population face this issue, so this is something, those people whose life spent mostly in the cities, in very good developed areas, or well to do households, so they can't imagine this issue, I think so. So it's more having no exposure to this problem. So I don't think so that I should blame them, but maybe they are not really aware that this really exists in our country. So it's not that I want to create bad name for my country. I want to improve the condition. I want to work so that everybody have this facility, and we have a good, healthy environment for every citizen without any discrimination, whether he or she is a rich or a poor. So this is a basic human right for every citizen, basic human need. So this is I'm working. Yes, I'm not upset from the criticism or from any harsh comment, but I want to work on that. That I should get eventually support from those people also. So how I should handle those critics, or my team, how should we should respond to them. So these are some key questions for us.
Absolutely. And there are a lot of similarities, and to be even more personal, here in Chicago, I mean, we have tremendous segregation. This is a deeply segregated city, and it's, it's been held up by, by recent presidents, I'll say, as a poster child for violence and all these things. So it's very local for me, it's personal for me to have somebody in a lot of power, saying things that aren't necessarily true, or sort of painting a certain picture that creates a very limited view of how my city that I love is looked at. And in other cases, it's absolutely true. I mean, we haven't, even in this city, let alone the rest of America, we have not addressed fully the idea of dignity and agency for all people, and creating economic conditions where people can thrive. So, and I think there's a very similar idea standing in it. Even if, I mean, it's great that you're not offended by those people, but they're still, in my opinion, from what I've heard, they're still standing in your way. They're actually working, especially if they have an audience, if they're vocal about it and they're out there, they're actively working against, what you're trying to raise awareness around. So I don't know what level of access you have. It's time consuming, but I do believe in the power of one-on-one conversations to start. I think, and again, if that's you telling the story or bringing along somebody else to give it more credibility and expand it, especially if you have people in your network that could be a bridge, that can somehow, maybe they've actually lived in both worlds for whatever reason. Maybe their economic condition changed and suddenly they were exposed to the condition of not having sanitation. Those kinds of stories are really powerful. Like here, if we look at gender issues, it's fascinating to hear stories from trans people, because they've kind of lived on both sides of it socially, right? And it's just fascinating because they're the only people who really can say what it's like. I mean, I couldn't possibly tell you what it's like to live as a woman, for example. So I think that's one idea, is just to sit with them, and maybe you're already doing that. Maybe it's not a new idea. And then, there's a part of what came up when you were saying that was, I was curious if they were, worried about Pakistan's reputation in a way. And I think that's a lot of what holds back this kind of progress, is we're so worried about the reputation that we're not actually addressing the thing that is causing a bad reputation. Right? So it's a paradox. And so to me, we care about our reputation when we're caught up in our head, when we're caught up with, sort of our image and how we look in the world. And I assume generally that kind of idea comes more with a privileged experience, because all the trappings of privilege and wealth and maintaining all of that status and being afraid that we're going to lose it in a way. But what we're really talking about here, I think, is getting out of our head and coming into our hearts and coming into our bodies, and really from a state of love. And that's not a soft concept for me. That's actually one of the hardest things, and one of the most important things for any of us to do, is to root ourselves in love, and to be able to hold space for each other to go through that journey. And only then are people going to one by one see what's happening here, see the conditions, and start to develop empathy for the people living in those conditions. And that, I think, is where the essence of motivation comes from, not only to provide financial resources, which can often be kind of transactional, like, I don't want to deal with that. Here, some money. And you need resources, obviously, so that's good. But to your point, what does it take for people to stay in it longer? What does it take to, train people and sort of, I'm just imagining, like what, I mean, it's one of the most essential parts of childhood for those of us who did grow up with this infrastructure, is to learn how to manage this part of the human condition, right? To manage the facilities, if you will. So I'm just sitting here. I'm still processing. I think, well, what would it be like not to have been trained in that way? Because what I do know is that it's very important to have a lot of our training, behavioral training, socialization happens when we're children, and if it doesn't happen, it tends to be much harder to change later. So, and I think the key of it is really socialization. Yes, there's a piece of this that's psychological, that that people could be educated and informed, and maybe break down whatever barriers they may have to this. But I actually think most of this would happen from social pressure, saying, oh, all of a sudden I'm not behaving like most of the people in my community or my tribe. And I think one of the most basic human fears is being kicked out of the tribe, and that's why we cling to belonging so much. So I think, there's something about the behavioral change that would really rely on the socialization.
So now, as the time is running really fast, I have one, might be it's a very personal question, that people like me who have such missions in their life and they are really working hard, even dreaming, when they are sleeping, they are dreaming about their mission. So sometimes they feel tired, or sometimes they feel kind of exhausted, sometimes stressed or hopeless. So how they should overcome this all kinds of challenges at personal level, and keep going.
Oh, I love that question. I could relate to that. I'm fairly tired today, actually. I think it's one of the most important things is that we do take care of ourselves, and it's one of the most common things that people that change agents neglect for whatever reason. And I think maybe it's we're so devoted to the cause, that we just sort of work tirelessly. I know for me, there's probably even a little bit of almost martyrdom, like, look at me, I'm suffering so much for the cause, that kind of thing. So what to do about it? I have a lot of what I've worked on personally in the last 6 years is just really looking at every part of my own well-being and my own health. And that started with, I would say, basics. You were saying only after, I think, food and water and shelter, is sanitation. So yeah, we got to look at those things, and I've looked at my own diet and what I'm putting into my body, working out, movement, just in the context of movement, and that can look a lot different for a lot of people. And it's easy to for those sorts of ideas not to work, because we set an expectation that, I should be living in this perfect sort of way in order to be a healthy person, in order to fulfill my mission. And I think setting those kinds of expectations actually can work against us, because then we set ourselves up to fail. So I think it's about incremental improvement, incremental progress. And I'm a big believer in meditation, big believer in meditation, whether it's 1 minute a day, 5 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day, an hour a day, whatever you can do. What's important is that it's consistent. And that really trains our nervous system to be more resilient over time, and to be able to show up. And sometimes just taking a break, really just giving ourselves permission to say, you know what, I have done enough and I need to take a break. I was doing that even on Martin Luther King Day, which was Monday here in America. And I found myself saying, you know, I did a number of things that day and I was wearing myself out. And then I decided, you know what, part of this work is really taking care of myself and taking a break. Because if I don't do that, and if you don't do that, we're not going to be able to show up here tomorrow.
Thank you, Andy, for your valuable time and very informative and productive suggestions for my viewers and for myself and the people like me who are very ambitious in about their work and mission. And thank you to our viewers who keep on with us in this program and commented and joined our show. Thank you once again, Andy, for joining the show.
Thank you for having me and for your wonderful work in the world. I'm happy to support it however I can.
Bye.